Hello and welcome to OT, the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, and how to spend it. My name is Andy Green.
I am, of course, Felix Schultz. How are you, Andy?
Felix, I'm great. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. I've had a bit of a week, as I'm sure you have as well. The week's about to get better, though, Andy.
Yeah.
You know why?
Tell me.
Because we're about to get Dan on the phone.
Who's Dan?
Dan is
The man.
Dan. Aside from being the man, I can't believe we didn't make that joke in the interview.
Fuck. Dan the man.
Dan the man is also known as Dan Brunn, and he is, I'm sure I've just pronounced that incorrectly. Brunn. From Dan Brunn Architecture. He's a California-based architect who's made some fairly impressive builds, as they say in the industry. Also done some interesting stuff with watches, and we will chat all about that. Before that, Andy, I got an email, and I thought this email would be relevant to particularly your interests, but also mine.
Yeah.
The Olympics are currently on, so we all love Japan at the moment.
We do.
We also love Australia because we're proud patriots. And we also love whiskey. So when those three things combine, it's time to talk about them. God, that was a terrible segue. Lark Distilling Company has unveiled their first Japanese-inspired whiskey.
Tell me about it.
Are you into your whiskies? Lark, I think, for the first thing. For some of our international listeners especially, they might not be aware of the fact that Australia produces some of the world's best whiskey. Lark is...
Tasmania, yeah.
Yeah, Tasmania is where it's at. They have been around since, I want to say the 19th century.
Late 1887 or something like that.
And they've got some pretty serious drops out there. They've got some gold medals from the International Whiskey and Spirits competition. I don't know if that's good. I assume it is. 96 points, 95 points for a couple of bottles, which is pretty solid. This, though, is something a little bit differently. It is the rare cask Mizunara, which is a very limited bottling of a handcrafted spirit that's been aged in a barrel of Japanese oak.
Mizunara oak, right? So it's 845 bottles, retailing for 1,000 Aussie dollars each, 700 ml bottle. Look, it's a little spenno, but I'm looking at the link you sent me, and it looks worth every drop.
So you get that for the stuff that we can't see visually. Perfectly distilled, notes of bright toasted oak, cherry, and apple pie, that classic Australian-Japanese combination, coconut and lychee, guava, pear, and fresh apple. What does a bottle look like, Andy Green?
So it's sort of like thin and rectangular with a really kind of charming numbered label on the front with it's like a copper medallion, is it? Copper medallion, brass medallion?
It's from one of the stills, the whiskey stills.
Yeah. So, it's pretty cool. I mean, Tasmania is a bit of I'd say it's Australia's hotspot for whiskey. So Lark, you've got Sullivan's Cove, you've got a few others, but Lark's probably, I dare say, the most prestigious
the big dog.
of the big dog. But there's probably a dozen Tasmanian distilleries, so it seems to be the right climate for it, and it's certainly cool to kind of support and check out Australian whiskey because,
we like anything small and artisanal, and that extends to what we drink, I suppose.
Yeah, limited, expensive, just right up my alley, basically. but it's sort of, I think the appeal of a lot of like Japanese inspired whiskey is that it's not as peaty and the stuff you get out of Scotland. So it's sort of a very different. Yep. Yeah, a little bit of a cleaner taste. So this is tempting. Like, I'm not one to spend $1,000 on a bottle of whiskey, but maybe that will change.
Yeah, sure. So, whiskey, get on it. I got nothing else there, Andy. Do you know what else I've been up to, though?
Drinking whiskey and watching Netflix.
I have been watching Netflix. I haven't been drinking too much in Lockdown 5, but I have been watching Netflix. Specifically, I've been watching a show called My Unorthodox Life. Are you across it?
Okay. I have not. Tell me about it.
Well, it's a reality show, basically. It's it's following a family around Kardashian style. This is following a woman around named Julia Hart, who is the CEO of Elite World Group Modeling Agency based in New York.
Sure.
Which is, par for the course in this sort of thing so far. The really interesting thing about it is, from my point of view, though, is that she used to be a member of a quite orthodox Jewish community. She describes it as sort of fundamentalist. She's no longer part of that community, and her family is in sort of various points of, being in and out of that, degrees of orthodoxy or religious Jewishness. So that's fascinating. They get some black hat action going on, but there's also some solid watches in here, Andy.
What have you seen?
Well, her husband wears a very nice Patek travel time. There's a lot of sports Rolexes. That seems to be the default amongst the family. But she has, and this is what sort of initially, got me focusing on the wrists. It looks like a Métiers d'Art Cartier number, and it's one of the ones with a fully either painted or pave or something dial with a panther on it. I haven't got a good snap, and I've done a bit of a stalk of her Instagram and haven't seen one close up. But that's her daily wearer. And I think that's quite a flex. So, yeah, I don't know if you watch, sort of fairly lightweight reality shows, Andy. I actually know you do. You watch bloody Timber Town, whatever.
Big Timber, yeah.
Big Timber.
Hanging out for season 2.
This is the, religious fashion confluence equivalent of that. Also, shout out to her BFF / chief operating officer, who's the real star of the show.
Okay, good to know.
Gregarious young man.
Well, I've been exploring the concept of watches in film and TV for our friends at A Collected Man. So, that'll be up in a few weeks on their website. But it's an interesting topic as to sort of and the further I dive into the space of sort of how watches end up in Netflix shows or in films or in music videos. So I've chatted to some brands. I'm chatting to watch PR. I'm chatting to a few celebrities as well to kind of get the different takes on how it all comes together. And it's an interesting one. But I haven't really been watching too much Netflix. I have been listening to an album where actually there is some watch spotting in some of the music videos. But a pal of mine named Patrick Droney has released an album called The State of the Heart. His debut album, it's phenomenal.
Paint me a word picture in 25 words or less.
My favorite album of the year, and probably one of my top 10 favorite albums of all time.
Really?
It's remarkable. It's remarkable. I'll send it to you. He's a young guy in Nashville. He's kind of got a musical background. I think his dad was a touring guitarist.
Sure.
You wouldn't, not like a household name necessarily, but probably wrote
and
performed.
Yards.
Yeah, really did. So he's just dropped the album. Some of the music clips have caught my eye because I think I saw him on Stephen Colbert's show wearing his two-tone Rolex Submariner on a rubber strap.
Oh, sick!
Yeah. So that's
I'll have to YouTube that. I'm sure if he was on Stephen Colbert, it'll be on the internet.
It is. It's very good. You might have. Yeah, I think I posted it to my Instagram stories. But he also rocks a Bremont. So
nice.
I think a world timer.
Bremont rocker.
Yeah. So in terms of music, it's sort of probably slightly country, but singer-songwriter.
Yep.
Really strong vocals, really strong lyrics.
Dude with a guitar, bit of a
really nice guitar.
Nice.
Yeah.
Hey, speaking of Bremont, just a quick one. They also released a watch that I'm a bit of a fan of over the last week or so. The new sort of Martin Baker line extension. I'm going to say Savannah.
Yes, the Savannah. Yeah.
I haven't seen it IRL, but I'm pretty keen to. It looks nice. It's got a sort of that tactical grey, almost a greeny grey sort of titanium case, which is new, and it's has that sort of safari look, that which is it's really sort of soft and muted, and I am there for it.
It's sort of cream dial and strap.
Yeah, our current little
Mojave
use of the
almost.
Word, that sort of. I don't know what I don't know. Savannah.
Desert vibes. It's the desert.
Yeah,
it's desert vibes
for the Savannah, maybe.
For the Savannah, not the Mojave.
Yeah, and I think there's some tie in there. It was done for the Korean Air Force. So
pretty cool. Yeah, it's a nice looking watch.
Yeah.
It's right up your alley, actually. Knowing how much you love those desert-inspired timepieces.
Titanium. I love me a desert-inspired watch. There's a list of top 5 desert-inspired watches.
Coming to an episode near you. Alrighty. Well, Felix, I think it is time to get Mr. Brunn, Dan Brunn from DB Architecture on the line.
Yeah, let's do it.
Felix, today we have a pretty interesting guest calling in from Los Angeles. His name is Dan Brunn, and he is an architect. Welcome to OT, the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here, Dan. I think we're going to have a really interesting chat with you today. You've got a fascinating sort of backstory and do some really amazing work. But I think the place to start is your background. You were born in I think in the 80s, I heard, in Israel, sort of Tel Aviv. and then made your way to America. What was that like? And can you tell us about it?
Yeah. So I was actually a '70s child, just at the end of that. But
My
what that,
apologies.
it's okay. But what the interesting thing about that, and I think the reason why I'm clarifying is my childhood encompassed a lot of different technologies that I see people that are born, let's say, in the mid '80s who never got to see. And growing up in Tel Aviv at the time, it was definitely more old world than you would have,
Mm-hmm.
what I experienced coming to the States. So it's even, it's even more of a, let's say, of a culture shock. So to give you like an idea, like I grew up with my dad recording me with a reel to reel. And then I had record player, I had cassette player, the first Discman. I remember that. I had a mini disc, and then I remember the iPod coming out. It's a whole different world than somebody who's born in I guess the mid '80s. But so yeah, so my background originally from Tel Aviv, and I grew up there, moved to the States, to LA in the mid '80s. And for those who are not aware, Tel Aviv is a UN World Heritage Site called the White City. And the reason being is it has the most international Bauhaus style architecture anywhere in the world. So I grew up in a very modern environment, and then transposed modern design, let's put it that way, and then transposed
Mm-hmm.
to Los Angeles, which did not have that.
Yeah, that's entirely fair. So those sort of formative years in, the Bauhaus wonderland that is Tel Aviv, did that consciously inspire you to have a love of good design and architecture, or did you sort of connect the dots later on?
It's actually very interesting. I don't know if my career trajectory would be where it is today if I didn't do the move and I wasn't so shocked by the difference. So, okay, so if we go back to my childhood, I
Mm-hmm.
was like a Lego fiend, and I was building like fantasy worlds, something you would see like maybe in Stanley Kubrick or something like that. And as I grew up, okay, so we moved to the States. Okay, so imagine my home in Israel was what people are trying, and I guess to emulate a lot now. And that is like, this modernist open plan, floor to ceiling windows, terrazzo floors, indoor outdoor relationships. All those things are something that I grew up with. And even my grandparents who lived in an apartment building was like that. Okay, so then fast forward to mid '80s, Los Angeles, and all of a sudden I'm sitting in this box that's in loose terms, in quotes, Mediterranean style. So if you're not familiar with LA, there's a lot of these typologies all over the place, but nothing is very contextually connected geographically or to the weather. And so I think what happened was all of a sudden I think I was confused. My home growing up as a kid was full of light, abundant of light. And all of a sudden I'm in this dark box, and I think I questioned it, like what's going on? And that's probably how I wanted to maybe contribute. And I think by the time I was a teenager, I knew I was going to be an architect.
Yeah, I think that's interesting that you there's a few influences going on there, but one sort of pricked my ears up, and that's Lego. Do all architects love Lego? It seems like a natural training ground.
I think so. The interesting thing is, I remember my grandfather would bring in Lego Technic, which isn't necessarily like architectural, and I was building cars and gears and things like that. So maybe as a kid, I had more of a chance to be an engineer, and more thinking about that. I also used to take apart things. I remember my dad bought like a Sony cassette player, and I took it apart, and that wasn't a good thing, obviously, and I couldn't put it together. But yeah, I mean, I think Lego contributes to spatial awareness, at least.
It's very cool, and sort of the technique stuff is definitely going to hurt your hands, and a bit of a painful one to put together. But you mentioned sort of by your late teens, you knew you were going to be an architect. How and why did you know that, and how did you kind of end up becoming an architect? Because you've got quite a few kind of really solid degrees, and I think you've got you went to Harvard at one point for your MBA, if I'm right. So how did that all
Masters,
happen?
masters of architecture, yeah.
So what were the next steps when you realized at sort of 17, which is quite a young age to know what you want to do with life?
It actually It actually came about because in high school, believe it or not, there was a architecture class, and so I took that, and all of a sudden, I had like the drafting skills, and I got really, I fell in love with it. And again, this goes back to like I learned everything by hand, which is really interesting. But yeah, and I think I knew at that point because, honestly, I wasn't doing very well in high school on everything else except for that.
Mm.
And so I started to excel into something, and I said, wait a minute, this is my space. So I was the kind of kid that enjoyed building things alone, versus like going out and, playing sports with friends and things like that. And so I think by that point I had found my space.
Yeah, fascinating. And I just picked up something you said there that you learnt by hand. So when you had your training as an architect and you were going through school and maybe even early practice, how common was, I guess, CAD? Was it a core part of what you
No,
did, or was it
you
sit
know
at the
what's
side?
insane? Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, this is actually something that again I think I got really lucky. If I were 10 years younger, my whole trajectory would have been different. So I was, I was there when they just started CAD, really, which is crazy. So, I was there at the beginnings of this, and you kind of used it as a tool, and you didn't know what to do with it, and you're literally staring at a screen of black and green, um, and it was just a digital drafting board, and it didn't do much more than that. But when we were going to school, um, we weren't supposed to use that as much as drafting by hand. And that was more of like an additional tool or additional technical skill. And then, especially when I got into architecture school in university, we weren't allowed to touch the computer until the third year. And one of the benefits of that is that I learned scale very, very well. Because when you're using the computer, you're constantly zooming in and out, in and out, in and out. And so you don't have that hand to eye coordination, being able to look down at your piece of paper and saying, okay, well, that centimeter or that inch is equal to a foot or a meter, and to understand what that is.
Mm.
And when I used to teach as well, and my students would have the hardest time, and they would have to put in a human figure into their drawings in order to understand scale, versus I could look at a floor plan and look at a door or something and be like, okay, well, this room is X by X, and I could feel it out. And it's been an asset. It's been an incredible asset.
Do you think, on balance, you said you teach architecture? Is there still a component like of old school drafting where you have to do that before learning computer programs, or is it all out of the way now? Like,
It's
is it all just,
over.
yeah, wow. Do
that
you
that romantic that's over. That's so done.
yeah
It's no longer the case. It's all by computer. Even though in school, maybe in the first year, they're still drawing by hand.
Do you think that, well, I guess it's a really hard question to ask, but do you regret that, or do you think it would be better if sort of people learnt the fundamentals in a different way, or is that like it's just a reality now?
It's a reality, and the way that it's really, what's curious is that people say I don't have any kids, okay, but when we look at it and we see people that are kids with their drawn to their iPads, and so they're going to lose the different, let's say, motor skills maybe, but I think the human brain is really interesting in that it picks up and it evolves because now one skill isn't necessary. And when we know that, through evolution, once you don't have to expunge energy to protect yourself from a lion, you're going to use your brain, and your brain grows to do other things. So I'm actually excited by that. What I'm not excited about is the fact that if you aren't careful, the computer is a very easy cut and paste and copy and paste. And so a student could look like they have a lot of skills from day one, even though they have nothing, because you could just plug in, oh, here's a door, oh, here's a this, and all of a sudden it looks like you have a building, but it's not actually worked out. And my ethos has always been, less is more, and editing, editing, editing. So like in my office, it's all about like finding out like how do we reduce this. So if I look at a set of plans that, let's say, one of our project designer has done, for me it's usually like, okay, well, let's synthesize this. What could we take away from this to distill it to the absolute minimal?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And so, kind of get to the early 2000s. I think 2005. You started DB Architecture, which is your
Yeah.
own firm. Um, reading about you, there's seems to be a particular property that really kind of helped kickstart that, the flip-flop house, which is a bit of a tongue twister. At what point did you realize you were really quite good at this craft and felt comfortable to go out on your own?
Oh my God. Okay, so I graduated from Harvard, and then I came back to Los Angeles, and the idea was to just get my architecture license. I did that while I was studying while I was studying, and I ended up also going to teach at university. So that's it. Kind of all happened. I don't know how to better describe it, but all of a sudden I was at it's a crazy story. And I didn't plan on starting DBA. I was at a photo rental studio, and basically what had ended up happening was my first project actually wasn't Flip Flop House. It was a showroom for a company called Caesarstone up in San Francisco area, Bay Area. And the company had hired me in order to kind of make a splash, and they invested $500,000 at that point into an interior space. And then they were reluctant to hire a photographer. And they had this like food photographer, like, we're going to use this person. And I was just like, oh God, you can't do that. We're not going to get the photos. You're not going to get the press, and my project is going to die. And so in undergrad, I actually had taken architectural photography. And now it's interesting right now. We'll keep going back to this theme of, I guess, how old I am. But in architecture school, I had the class that we took was literally with a 4x5 camera, which is film based. And if you've ever seen like photos of like somebody standing with a big camera and a drape over them and taking a photo, that's literally how it was, and that's what I learned how to use. And so I ended up buying one of those, a used one, and they were not expensive at the time, but I needed some lighting equipment. So I went to my local shop that I've known for years, and I was talking to the clerk. As I was talking to the clerk, he had this other lady had come in, and she started talking. And I had shown the clerk a portfolio of the project, like little snippets that I took on my 35 millimeter camera. And he says, "Hey, Hetty, look at this. Look at this. This guy's an architect. Look at the project he's done. It's really cool." And she goes, "Oh my God, we've been looking for an architect. We have a virgin piece of land on Venice Beach." She's like, "Where did you go to school?" I'm like, "Oh, I went to school at Harvard." She's like, "Oh, my daughter just went to school there, not in architecture." And a few weeks later, I was hired to do Flip Flop House, and I was shocked. I was 27, I think, at the time.
Wow.
Really, really young, and all of a sudden I'm working on a beachfront property. I hadn't. And here's a little tidbit. I wasn't licensed yet when they were interviewing me, and in America you can't call yourself an architect unless you're licensed. And at the same time, they were interviewing me, and they did like all these background checks, like, and then we're going to have you talk to the accountant, or we're going to have you talk to our lawyer, we're going to have you talk to the banker to qualify me. Luckily, while all this was happening, it was slowing down the whole process, and I got a letter in the mail finally saying you're an architect, and it happened right before signing the contract, which is incredible. So I got really, really lucky.
Yeah, I think that's really. And look, we'll link up Flip Flop House in the show notes because you have to see it to kind of understand the significance of what you just said. But it's a significant block of land right on the beach. The design. It's like a 3 or 4 story house from the pictures I'm looking at, and looks like quite a expensive and bespoke build. So a very substantial job, I imagine, to land, and you probably worked on it for a really long time. What really stands out to me though is that this is a 16-year-old house that is probably you probably started designing even before then. The design stands up, especially in the current landscape that you kind of see in architecture, around Venice Beach and the world. How like what's the secret to it being so modern and not dating like most of the other modern builds we see?
Well, thank you so much, because I mean my whole ethos has been about timelessness. And I think when you really are able to distill something, and we've heard these are not my terms, form follows function, and less is more. But okay, so this goes back to my roots. Tel Aviv, those buildings, those modern buildings that I grew up with were built in the 20s actually, and 20s and 40s, that's when it really got started, maybe 50s. And so they responded to a necessity and to weather. And I did the same. So, my client had asked me, she had 2 requests. One, to be able to take a shower while having a view and privacy. And number two was to have wraparound balconies. So the wraparound balconies are something that's commonplace in Bauhaus architecture. And I really did that. And so the whole house, I mean, there's nothing in there that isn't necessary. And I think when you do that, that's beauty. And it comes back down to, if you pick up a leaf in nature and the structure of it, there's, it's timeless because of that. There's no embellishment on it. But wow, I never, that was a good one, Andy, because I mean, I never realized that's essentially a 20-year-old building because that's when I started to design it.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah.
And it's also for sort of like a first major sort of job, Caesar Stone aside.
Yeah.
That's an incredibly high bar. Like, I can't imagine there are too many, completely new builds on Venice Beach even 20 years ago.
They weren't. I mean, Felix, this is where I owe my client. She was a visionary. You have to understand, like nobody was willing to spend that much money at Venice Beach at the time. Number one, and nobody was going to hire a guy who just graduated. I was a kid, and she trusted me with millions of dollars, in the development of this thing. And nobody was doing it. By the way, it was so far fetched that the bank wouldn't authorize the loan at the beginning because they just like, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't pencil out. Are you stupid? Well, let me tell you, she was not stupid at all. And by the way, we just completed the second house for the same client. 1, 2, 3, 4 houses down from there.
That's incredible. So, and this is this doesn't have to be about, architectural practice. It can be about business because you've just mentioned how important the client is in the relationship. What did that first, and I can only imagine very high pressure job, teach you about yourself or your business?
Good question. Wow. So number one, okay, when I was asked, could I do it? My answer, and this probably does come back to my Israeli roots of, yeah, I could do anything. And so I was like, yeah, of course. Yeah, I could do this. I've designed houses before. The reality was I had no idea. I didn't know there was so many different bureaucratic entities that I needed to deal with that I had no idea how to deal with. I didn't know how to do a 3-story building on a very tight lot. It's very difficult. You have to deal with parking. You have to deal with so many different things. It was a big challenge, a big ask. But I think the bottom line about, let's say about business is that it takes a certain kind of goal, and to be able to take something like that on, and to be able to also at the same time create enough of a aura of accomplishment that I was going to be able to achieve it. And I think what's interesting is over the years, that naivety is very hard to maintain because as you grow, you realize the risk that's involved, right? So like when you take it on, you're like, okay, what could I lose? I don't have a business. I don't have anything. I don't have employees. I got nothing to lose. If somebody sues me, there's nothing. Now, fast forward nearly 20 years, and it's there's a lot more risk.
Stakes are high.
And so that's hard. And how do you maintain that?
Well, that's interesting, and I think that I've sort of read a bit about this house, and it seems to be the launch pad for your individual career, but also one of your more pivotal pieces of work. I'm curious to hear: is this the defining sort of style that you produce, or how, in your own words, would you kind of describe the work that you do, and how much work do you do kind of per year? Because it seems very sort of intensive and bespoke.
Okay, so people always say an architect won't have their defined style probably until they're like 60 years old or 50 years old. I don't buy into that. I think that's maybe somebody who is naive, or I don't know. I think I don't know how to say it, but I think I've always had a proclivity towards a certain type of a style. And as the years are going on, yes, things are being defined. But I could tell you what's so interesting, and these questions are actually really great, and I love doing these kind of things because it gives me a chance to review my own self, right? So that I use these podcasts and these interviews for that. So one thing that's interesting is, okay, so Flip Flop House, the history of it, the name of it, okay, was very very poignant. So basically it was at the same time in the States that Barack Obama was running for president, and everybody kept calling him a flip flopper. But that's not where the name came from. It's just interesting that I could always place that in history. And then some people are like, "Oh, flip flop house, it's on the beach, so yeah, flip flops." I'm like, "Nope, that's just another little pun and tongue in cheek. That's fun." But the idea for me was that the client, they did have another request, and that is they have a collection of photos, and they wanted to be able to have the photos on display while at the same time they want to view. And how do you do both? And so the house has these four big, I would say 2.5 meter by 2.5 meter, maybe 3 meters, boxes, walls that are pivots, and those flip flop, open and close. And what that does is when they're open, let's say like 15 degrees, you have this amazing view. At the same time, you have a wall to store everything. Now, fast forward to my last project that we just, my let's say my last home completed, which is Bridge House. It has that same language, even though it doesn't move. There's these four fin walls, and these kind of fins have like shark fins. They gills, sorry. They've been evident on a lot of our projects, which is strange. And it's something that, I never defined. I never said, okay, well, here's my language and how I'm going to define it. It just so happened that that happened. And in terms of like the overall language of the building, again, like I try to find materials that are going to be timeless. So, I had a magazine who asked me like, "Oh, what's trending right now?" And I said, "The sun is rising on the east and setting on the west. That's the trend that I know." And that's it. I don't know the trend. So like when somebody wants to do like subway tile backsplash, I'm like, no, 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 because that's a pain in the ass to clean. So I think that's why this house or all of them are staying timeless, is because everything serves a purpose again. And it's about the human experience. So if you design something for human scale and human experience, that's not going to change. That's just going to stay. Um, so I'm not sure I completely answered the question, but yeah, I don't think I never sought out to define a style. But now looking back, there's definitely something there, and people could look at it and figure it out. But I think overall, I had a similar question, and one of the things I answered was that what I guess like secret to success is empathetic design, and that's a label that I've come up with, and it essentially means that you're actually listening and figuring that out. So you're listening to your client, your brand, your site, everything, distilling that and answering back. And as an architect, if you could do that, you're winning, because if you're not leading with your own ego, the client will always be very happy, and then you could do basically anything you want.
Yeah, well, that's still a very good answer. And you kind of mentioned the next house on our list, which is
Oh,
your personal house that obviously you designed and built, and it seems really interesting. It was mentioned in the LA Times, which is usually a good sign that it's well executed. What was it like, sort of that experience for you? Putting decades of architectural work to really build something that was personal to you.
okay. So it didn't start out as being personal to me. That's the interesting thing. So I lived across the street before, and ended up befriending the caretaker on
Mm.
that was on the site. And I used to have a band, and I invited her to come see us perform for basically 2 years. And one day she's like, "Hey, you know what? This is going to go for sale." The idea was to take this site and actually design a home take the home that's there, refurbish it, and then sell it and make some money.
Mm.
And then things changed, and all of a sudden I came up with this whole idea of this house. But still, it was still the idea that this was going to be a development for sale. And then later on, it all kind of switched. But in all seriousness, I never took it that seriously. I never took it as like, oh my God, this is my own house, and this is going to be my tour de force of what my language means and everything. I'm never cognizant, I guess, of the problem, or I didn't think about it that way. And so there are some spaces that I thought about how I would live, but I don't think that I ever truly made it so personal that this is Dan's home. I think it's a home that when people visit, they just gravitate towards it, and it's a very much uh, pliable home. that just works for a lot of different circumstances. So I don't know how personal it is, even though it's mine.
That's really interesting, especially given my next question, which I don't know about you, but Andy, but I don't live in a house that I've designed myself.
No.
And it kind of irritates me sometimes. There's things that are in places that are odd, and there are some choices that happened, I assume, 100 years ago that I find weird. What's it like living in something you created?
Fucking awesome. What can I tell you? I mean, it's. I mean, what's helped me is that it actually it's the first time I get to live in something that I created, right? So as an architect, most of the time you're designing something, you finish it, and then somebody else lives in it, and you don't get to fully experience it. So I've lived here a full year, and I know what happens during winter and summer, spring and fall, and you see how the sun reacts to things, and I could take, like, let's say, a check box and go like, yep, that works. Yep, that works. Yep, that works. And I could also realize and be more empathetic towards my clients, and realizing the things that don't work, and the things that make things not as streamlined as I'd like it to be. So it's been incredible because of that. And I one of the questions people ask me is like, oh, this must be your dream home. You've always must have thought about creating this bridge house. Absolutely not. This was a response to a site, and that's it. There's nothing else to it. There was a site, there was an answer, and this is it. I wouldn't create Bridge House again just because, and it wasn't something that like 14-year-old version of me drew up. And I don't have the next dream house. I can't even tell you. I don't even know what the trajectory is for my path.
Just a quick note, because people listening to this, they might not have hit the show notes yet and had a look at Bridge House. Why is it called Bridge House? And you're talking about responding to the site. What do you mean by that?
So the site is I'll do this in feet. The site is 260 feet long and 60 feet wide. And the house itself is 20 feet by 210 feet long. And there's a creek running down the middle of it, perpendicular to all of that. And so the house literally bridges itself over an existing creek.
Yeah,
Nice.
amazing. The pictures look fascinating, and it looks really really long, and yeah, it's cool. I think I read a description that's sort of like a tree falling over the top of a creek, which is really...
And it's to give you an idea, as a universal length, instead of metric or imperial, it's about the length of full size 4 city buses long, and 2 of them wide. That gives you an idea of what this house is.
Cool. And if we talk to your studio a little bit, it doesn't just do architecture. You also have some products on the website as well. Can you explain what they are and where they fit into your broader work and design philosophy?
Absolutely. So actually, we just got a call about another project, and they said, "Oh, can you recommend us an interior designer?" I said, "Yeah, you're talking to them right now." So to us, architecture starts from within and goes out, right? So that's how we design. So it goes from the human body and expresses itself to the shape of the outside, always. And so a lot of times that comes with necessity, maybe of something custom. So we design in the vein of, let's say, the master Frank Lloyd Wright. He designed all of these built-ins, like furniture pieces all throughout, and so we do that as well. And then what ended up happening is, actually, the first product that we designed was for the Caesarstone showroom. We needed to show a bathtub, and I was looking through the catalogs, and there was just absolute crap out there. And I turned to the team and I said, "Why don't we use your product and I'll design something?" And they said, "Wonderful." I ended up designing this bathtub that got celebrated all over. And again, I remember, like, somebody wrote, like, the first bathtub that doesn't have LED lights, that's new, and then it has a new shape. And again, like this sort of naivety. I was like, okay, I'm going to design a bathtub. And then that product, I started selling them. And then all of a sudden somebody said, "What if it leaks?" And I was like, oh my God. And I stopped. Because if you install one of these, like, on the 10th floor of a building and it leaks, that liability is just insanity. So okay, no more bathtubs. And then fast forward to Flip Flop House, we implemented one of these kind of like upside down contact lens bathtubs that I'm sure you guys have seen, these like vessel tubs. But the downfall of that is that you don't have a deck to put your stuff down on, and you don't have a place to sit. And so all of a sudden we look for products and there's nothing available. And I came up with this bench. And the bench has storage in it, and the bench is made out of these slats that you could put your towel on, and it will dry, and you could be wet on it. And then we ended up calling it Heady Bench because the client is named Heady. And then we made that available for sale. And then as years went on, when I did my own house, all of a sudden I needed a piece of art and I couldn't afford anything, so I painted something. Everybody ended up loving that. And then I said, you know what? Why don't we do a numbered piece? We take that art piece and I'm going to paint over the Heady Bench. And we made that into a product. And so that's how, for us, like products became part of DBA. And it's some way that we have fans that will maybe never build anything, but they still love our work, and it gives them a chance to kind of express their love and buy into it.
Yeah, that's cool. One thing I'm just sort of thinking back to, talking about how architecture is responding to your environment, and you're talking about, using materials. What role does sort of sustainability and reducing waste and other environmental considerations play in your practice?
This one goes back again to my roots. Growing up in Israel, resources were very scarce. Water, oil, you name it. And I'll give you an example. When I had to take a shower, you had to turn on the heater, and the heater wasn't an active heater. What it was is essentially a big water tank, and then a meandering tube that went right, left, right, left, right, left, painted black over a angled piece of wood, and it would just you would press a button, and it would open up a valve, and the water would run left, right, and it would get hot from the sun. And you would basically have 15 minutes to take a shower, or 10 minutes, and then that's it. Cold water, screw you. And so that's how I knew that resources were scarce. And then moving to the States, it was like the opposite. It was like I could water my lawn, I could water my garage, I could it was, and I couldn't handle it. And so for me, I think from day one, as sustainability became popular, I was like, okay, yeah, I grew up with that. And so Bridge House, for example, is a net zero home, and that means that all the energy consumed is made on site. So the roof is full of solar panels, and actually really really cool. During COVID, I had an electric car. I never even had to go to a gas station if I needed to go anywhere. So like less touching, less interacting. It was really awesome, and all of it was produced on site.
That's amazing. That's really cool, and I think that this sort of the chat around your background is a really good place to pivot into a bit of watch talk, because we are a watch podcast, and I know that you're pretty enthusiastic about it. But Dan, what's the deal with you and watches?
My deal with watches actually started again when I was a little kid, and it was Swatch watches, and I was obsessed with them. And it's probably, I never realized it, and now I'm thinking about it. It's probably the customization that I was able to do with them. In the '80s, they had like guards that you could buy in different bands and all these different things, and I just kind of loved the collecting of them. And I did that over the years, and I kind of grew my collection. And then as I started to work and started to make some money, I saved up, and I ended up buying an Omega Seamaster. And that's kind of where it all, my love for watches began. And I think I just loved the technical aspect of it, and this little jewel box of amazement. It's really really cool when you think about it, and the precision of what they are. And it's a timepiece that's timeless. It really hasn't changed in centuries, really, and we're keeping time in the same way. So you could really hold on to it, and I like things that are, again, timeless, something that you could buy and not throw away. And the same thing like my guitars, like we look at guitars, they haven't changed. It's the same 6 strings tuned the same way, and the technology, they're trying to come up with different ways of making them better, but really all they're coming up with is different ways of producing them. And the same with watches.
Your first sort of, I guess not plastic Swiss watch was the Omega Seamaster. Why that one? What was it at the time that drew you to that sort of quite distinctive
James Bond, guys. James Bond.
I didn't want to assume, but
yeah. James Bond, that's it. I always loved him, and that Omega was just something special. And it's interesting that I think about it because obviously he had also the Explorer was no the Submariner. But I don't know. I just didn't it didn't click to me, and it seemed so run of the mill. And the Seamaster was just something really special. And I had a titanium one, and so it was like a precious metal. It was lighter than Omega, and it was in a way, it's also the underdog, right? Everybody thinks like Rolex, 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 but truly that timepiece was at the time better made than what Rolex was offering. It was really an incredible timepiece.
Yeah, fascinating. And the note I made was sort of around the scale sort of conversation we had a little bit earlier in reference to sort of architecture. What I'm interested in is how important scale is to you when it comes to appreciating a watch.
Wow, it's a good one too. This is it's on a completely different schedule, right? It's different scale. As we're talking meters to nanometers, really. But and it's how it fits your body. And that's honestly what makes the best watch, I think. It's in the end they're all keeping time, but how does it fit on your wrist? And you'd think it's so simple, right? It's a couple of lugs and and a bracelet, but some watches just fit, and some just honestly just do not. And it's the same thing as when you put on a shirt. Either it just fits or it doesn't fit. And to me, that's the scale that you're dealing with. So maybe, I mean, I'm drawing a parallel here for the first time. A timelessness of a building is the way it fits to the body as well, and the way that you're able to interact with it versus something that's grotesque and doesn't, and it won't age well. And I bet that's true for watches as well. The watches that are made for the human hand are the ones that will last forever, versus the ones that are like, oh, let's add some more little nuance and some more pizzazz and some more this and that. It becomes a trend, and that's where you I think you lose when you're designing.
Absolutely. That's, I think, a really, really good insight into sort of, watches and design. Speaking of trends, one thing that sort of has been dominating watch design in the last, I don't know, 15 years or so is this real looking back at the past. Like everything's a re-edition, everything's a recreation of the sort of the golden era of watch design from the 50s and 60s. As an architect that's sort of inspired by, formative work from the early half of last century, is it the same? Like, is architecture looking back self-consciously?
I don't think it's looking back in the same way self-consciously, and I think the reason, I think we lost something. We developed, and then it's like, wait a minute, we got to go back in terms of certain types of architecture. At the same time, technology has flourished so much in architecture that you're able to produce things that you were never able to produce before with the aid of, CNC and CAD, which is just really, really cool. Honestly, maybe a snarky comment, but I think the watch industry has to look back right now, because if they look forward, they're fucked. And so they have to hold on to something, and they have to basically be able to show why is a Rolex worth so much when, quite honestly, it's not. A stainless steel Rolex is only worth as much as how many times they could produce one. And so I have a really hard time with watches these days, especially the very expensive watches, because I don't think that there is really a place for it much more. And they're trying to come up with reasons why they're valued versus before. Like if you bought a Rolex in the 70s or 80s, there was literally a watchsmith putting that thing together, and it took time, and it was hard to do, and somebody had to sit there and polish it, and there was a lot of labor involved. Guess what? It's over, and so there's other ways of producing it, and there's CNC machines that do it, and yeah, you hand finish it, but a lot of it is bullshit, and a lot of it is marketing. And so they're trying to come up with a way to keep their brand identity. And I mean, we all know there's the Apple Watch out there that's selling more than all the Swiss watches combined. And there's a reason why. And by the way, it does fit on your wrist very, very, very well. Um, so I think I mean, at least that's my take of why watches are going back in that sense, and they're trying to show somebody like, hey guys, it's like a little kid raising their hands, but I have historic relevance. I'm historically relevant. Look at me, look at me, look at me. Otherwise, what are they going to do? I mean, I just walked by the Hublot boutique and they have stupid digital watches. I mean, don't even go there. You cannot compete with Apple. I mean, that's just a stupid. In the end, it's almost like a Casio data bank from the 80s. You know, what are you really truly offering? It's not a better experience at all, just a more expensive experience.
That's a really interesting take. And, you know, the flip side of that, and maybe it's a short, you know, solution, is that watches are bigger than they ever were before. And
They are.
Yeah, but you don't think that's going to last? You think people are going to wake up and realize that?
I think they've already woken up.
Yeah, okay.
I honestly, I think they have. I think, and I think that's why historic preservance is really, really important. And for the watch brands to hold on to that, I think when they're struggling, when you have a company like Rolex trying to limit supply, that tells you everything, and that tells you that they can't compete, and they have to do something like that. And I think that's just not enough. You need to be able to come up into the market with something a little bit better than that. And I would like to see, like, for example, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, so do you, you know, a lot of the sort of the Swiss guys, they'll sort of respond to the Apple Watch and its popularity by saying people aren't going to wear an Apple Watch forever. They're not going to wear it, you know, 24/7. They're going to maybe start with that. Like a generation that hasn't worn a watch before will realize that something works on the wrist, and eventually they'll graduate to a, you know, a Rolex or an Omega or whatever it is. Do you buy that?
Nope, not in the least. Not in the least. I don't see. First of all, either they won't wear a watch at all, and if I think if I have to fast forward 20 years time, there won't be an Apple Watch, and not that there won't be an Apple Watch because Apple Watch has failed. Just there's going to be so many different other technologies that are probably going to be biotechnology that's embedded, and we won't even need it. Um, so if I have to look forward, maybe the Swiss watches will last because they will be retro and cool, and they will be very purposeful. And so there won't be an Apple Watch, or there won't be, let's say, a digital watch, and it won't be because it failed. It just be because it progressed to technology that you and I can't even think today. And if I have to think about a parallel, I'm very much into car culture as well, and vintage cars, anything from the 90s and before, has skyrocketed value as new car manufacturers are creating these incredible machines, but they're boring, and they're auto driving and they're auto this, da 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 da. But in the end, there's not much excitement that you get from it, and so that's why I think the parallel goes to these Swiss watches that are going back in time, because that is where the excitement was, and that is where it's going to stay, and that's timeless. For example, and then the other part that's really to me exciting about the watchmaking is the ones that are true and understand that technology is changing, right? So like, okay, let's get into carbon fibers, let's get into ceramics, let's get into CNC, let's do all of these things. That's really, really cool. I love that. I love that. The old world version of that was to find like a Patek that had a calendar, 365. To me, that was really cool. I get it, and there's a value to it, and the complexity of building it. Today, I'm not excited about it because it I don't know, it just doesn't move me. I'm much more excited to see the new technologies that are available in the watches. And the parallel I go back to, let's say, a car, is that an old car, actually you get to experience that. You get to actually, it brings a smile to your face as you press the accelerator, as you hear the engine whirl. There's something to it. It moves you. And maybe the same thing goes to a guitar. You're able to use it, utilitarian value. So watch is a very interesting expression in that I try to find out what is the actual enjoyment factor of a watch. And I like to ask that of people to see what they say. What is it? Is it the collecting? Is it the rarity? Is it, do you understand the way it's manufactured? I don't know. It's a very, very, very interesting and dynamic place to be.
Agree, and that was a solid answer. And we appreciate the candor as well. There, it sounds like your take is one of and it's very heavily influenced by your design background and your upbringing and sort of even those environmental factors. But really, it comes down to, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's sort of just not wanting to create things for the sake of it and creating things with purpose, which is something we hear from a lot of designers. Is like, anyone can start this or do this, but if the world already has enough, why would you?
Yeah.
What I think this is the perfect segue into a project that you've got going on, which isn't entirely a new watch, but it's a I guess reimagined existing watch. Can you tell us about it?
Yeah. And wow, Andy, I never thought about it that way, but and that is very true. Like, why do you need to create? And we asked about ecology. Like, why do you need to create something new if the old one already does it? Um, unless the new one is more accessible, right? So like, I would love it if, for example, like, yeah, you and I could go into a Rolex boutique and just go pick up a GMT made out of stainless steel. It should be readily available. The next generation should be able to pick it up, and that's it. Or you want to go for the vintage, so that, I guess that's my take on that. But so basically, I think, okay. So what happened with me is, yes, I was collecting watches, and I'm sure my candor is probably riled up a lot of people listening to this, but my take on this. So okay, so I had my Omega Seamaster, then I ended up having a Ike Pod, which was designed by Mark Newson, one of my favorite. Hey, he's Australian, and I absolutely adore him. I think he's a genius. He's one of the few that actually redefined a design style. So then I had one of those, and I was gifted a Hublot Big Black Magic. It's all Big Bang Black Magic, I think it was called, all super black. Freaking love that. And then the last thing that I bought myself was a Rolex Daytona, and that was like the holy grail. All of those got stolen. Okay, so you fast forward, somebody broke into my house, they took the safe, they took it all, gone. And my heart was just broken, and the Seamaster was gone too, and that one I had since I was 19 years old. And then I started to think about it, the superfluous nature of my existence in a way. Like, why did I have all these watches? What did they do except for signify being able to collect something? Because the usability of them didn't do much. Okay, I don't go scuba diving. What am I doing? It's not serving its purpose. Unlike, you can own several cars and each one of the cars does something different. And you could drive it and feel it. Okay, so fast forward all these years, I missed having a real watch. And by the way, I bought a Apple Watch Series 1, the first one, just to understand what it is, just to be contemporaneous. And that's the last one I bought, because I'm sick and tired of notifications. So fast forward till today, and I started to think about what would be my ultimate watch that will transcend time. And so I went back to my Mega Seamaster, and I sourced a really good used one. And then I started to think about what did I like in my other watches. So I love the Daytona dial and the cleanliness of it. I love the black on the Big Bang, and I loved my Omega as it is, and I love the band on the iPod. And I kind of took those all in a blender in a way in the back of my mind. And so I started with this Omega Seamaster, and I disassembled it, and I distilled it, and some things like, as graphically important to Omega are those waves that they have on the dial. I removed those, shaved those off, and basically made it all very monotone. Removed all of the graphics on it. Nobody needs to know it's 300 meters, chronometer, all this crap. No, who cares? That shouldn't be there, and it should be about design instead of advertising. And so I removed all of that. I redid the dial, redid the bezel in ceramic, um, and then the whole body was disassembled and PVD in black. It has a rubber strap with a deployant, also in black. And so it was sourcing all these things. And what I loved is, we asked the question about scale, and all of a sudden you're in the nano scale. And on this watch, what you have is matte black to glossy black, and white and black and red, and that's it. And it's so nice when you move it around on your hand and you see these little elements of it shining or not shining. Um, wow. And now, so the idea with that is, I made it, and a friend of mine was like, huh, why don't you make this into a product that's available? And I thought, okay, let's do that. So the next step is going to be to actually release it as like a numbered, very limited series um, watch. And I actually designed a, really cool box for it as well, because one of my issues, I guess, with watches is these boxes that are just, you buy them, you don't throw them away because they're valuable just because of what they are, but not because of the use of it. So I designed a box that will be able to be left on your desk and used for other things. And I'm really excited about that as well. And that's basically the last step of the whole watchmaking process.
That's a really interesting process and a really way at coming at that sort of horrible story about having a collection stolen and then sort of instilling it into a single watch. That's really interesting way of coming up with this sort of limited series custom run. Would you ever,
Yep.
this process, would you be tempted to take it further? Would you ever want to design a watch completely from the ground up?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I would love, 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 love that opportunity, and this has been like one of those moments where I started to learn about it, and you're like, okay, well, how could I switch scales, and take this watch? I want to do that, and I start. What I did was, we talked about CAD, so I got the software now to start looking into that, and yeah, I started to think about it, like, hey, could I take, because you could source these ETA movements quickly and easily these days, and you could manufacture your own watch in a way. So yeah, I have been thinking about it. I would love to do it more though with a partner, and to find
Mhm.
another brand that would take it on with me, because one of the things that I learned when doing furniture was that I'm really good at the design aspect of it and figuring out all the resources, but I don't want to be in the business of the business. And that's where it killed me. So when I did the furniture, in the end was like, okay, well, now you have to deal with the logistics and the selling and the warranty, blah blah blah. I don't want to be doing that. So I would love the opportunity to design for a company.
Yeah, wouldn't we all? Back on the Omega Watch project, just quickly. I think you said it was a pretty low production run. Could you let us know
Yeah.
how many and when it's sort of going to be available at certain stages?
It will be available directly through our Instagram, so DB Architecture, and online,
Mm.
danbrunn.com. And we're looking to get it done for Christmas delivery, and pre-orders will probably be coming in the next couple of months. And the way that I'm going to create it is going to be probably 3 editions of the watch. The first edition is going to be limited to 25 pieces. And then I've already unbelievably sold 5, which is just crazy.
Mm.
Just through word of mouth, through like fans. I was like, oh, okay, okay, let's do it. They didn't even see the box yet. But they're just like, okay, I want to get in on it. I'm like, okay, great. And then after those 25 are gone, the next edition, the dial is going to be different. And maybe that one will be a bigger run. We'll see. I'm really curious about the demand, and it takes a certain kind of connoisseur to understand that we're taking an old stock watch and reimagining it. So it's something from the 90s, and rethinking into something new for today and contemporary.
That's incredible. And one other sort of thing I've noticed, you've mentioned your Instagram there, which we'll obviously link up in the notes. There's beautiful photography. Is some of that photography your own?
No, this is maybe 1 or 2 photos, but you have to give credit where credit is due. And quite honestly, this is one of my best friends. His name is Brandon Shigeta. We went to Harvard together, studied architecture, and quite honestly, I told him, like, one day, I said, for anybody that hasn't visited my work, and that's 99% of the people, you are the representation of me for eternity. And that's crazy, and that's like, yeah, he's such a talent. And he's been there through it all from the beginning of my career. It's incredible that I get to work with one of my best friends to do that, and so I trust him completely, and he gets to represent anything that gets done through his eye.
Amazing. Amazing. Well, Dan, we've got to the point of the show where we kind of wrap out with one last set of questions, and those are recommendations. And it can be anything that you think the listeners might enjoy, anything from podcasts to books to TV. But we'd love to hear, what you've been enjoying lately that you want to share with everyone listening today.
Ooh, that's a good one. I never had that asked of me before. So, um, what's interesting is, okay, I'm sure everybody's been watching on the news the things that have been going on in Israel, and so for me, being Israeli and proud and seeing how the media is contorted certain things, I actually ended up picking up a book by an author, a fellow Israeli called Noah Tishby. It's just called Israel, and she writes it in a very storytelling way. Like it could be things that it'll literally write AF, like as fuck, in there, and it's just great, and it shows a lot of the history. So for anybody who's interested, and that's been really awesome. And then really funny. So I mentioned I had a band. One day I was listening to a TV show, and all of a sudden I'm listening and I hear this riff, and I'm like, oh my god, that's the same bass line and a very similar tone to the song that I wrote many years ago. And obviously, it was not copied because we were never famous, but it's a band called The Blinders, and an incredible band who just deserve, I guess, more recognition. And I really enjoyed it. So those two things are on. That's really my, I guess, my go-to things.
Solid. There's two great recommendations, something to read and learn about and something to enjoy while you're reading. Dan, it's been a really fascinating chat with you, learning about your architecture practice and your, how that sort of translates into watches. We can't wait to hear more about your watch project and where that might take you. But thank you so much for being on OT the podcast.
Oh, thank you guys. It's been a mind expanding pleasure, quite honestly, and I really appreciate the time as well.
Back at you, mate.
Andy, that was a real treat, and my biggest takeaway from it is that we need to get more designers on the podcast. Artists, architects, they're so cool. I just love speaking to them.
And actually qualified to talk about objects in detail and the specifics of design, which we are certainly not, but we can give unqualified opinions all day long. Lovely guy, very generous with his time. Yep. His work is phenomenal, so make sure you check it out. Make sure you check out his Instagram as well.
We'll link all
and while you're there,
up.
Hit ours up, ot.podcast. Thank you for listening. Thank you for emailing us, otthepodcast@gmail.com. Felix, there's a bit of chatter happening over in our Discord.
Oh, yeah, it's going off is maybe just slightly too hectic.
Enthusiastic.
But there's some good, solid bands.
Yeah. So come check it out. And if you like OT, keep sharing it, keep subscribing, keep telling your friends, and we will catch you.
Keep listening.
Yeah. Keep listening. We'll see you guys next time.